Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, let me thank the organizers for inviting me to this very important Thiruvananthapuram dialogue on maritime issues, something which is very, very relevant and significant in the current context. Let me compliment Professor Mohanan Pillai also because the way he has planned and thought about this theme really shows that how the academia and others really have to show interest in maritime domain. I am not going to repeat whatever has been discussed since morning. I would just like to highlight the three dimensions of maritime domain, or three verticals of maritime domain, and each of these verticals really has gained momentum in the recent times. The first vertical which I see, which is very critical to maritime context, is Southeast Asia, and how that really has been gaining momentum, especially because of the fact that the sea lines of communication, which always is vulnerable from various types of attacks, and how that really has to be protected. So the protection and the security of the sea lines of communication, which stretches from the Straits of Malacca to the Straits of Hormuz. And that speaks volume about the intent of either the terrorist groups or the pirates, and how they really have been proactive, and how India has been playing a very pivotal role in terms of not only containing piracy, but also helping the other nations to see that how they are feeling confident in terms of their seaborne trade. As was pointed out, 80,000 ships passes across their sea lines of communication every year. And that obviously is something which we need to be putting more emphasis on. So Southeast Asia remains very central. Even the current debate, I think, has not been diminishing. Even the US, as was pointed out by Ambassador Sok Sajan Har, that the US national security strategy has really been silent on the US increasing role in the Indo-Pacific. It's not like that. I think they may not have mentioned categorically, but they really are very proactive in the Indo-Pacific region. And how they have become proactive is only because of the fact that China's rise in the Indo-Pacific region has really been seen as a concern. And China basically, China's rise is seen in a very systematic fashion, and that perhaps is also very important to understand that how they really came up with the shipbuilding project. Way back in the 60s they started. They really came up with the nuclear-powered submarine, which again they started way back in the later part of 60s. They came up with the aircraft carrier capability. So if you see the competition which is again going in the Indo-Pacific, they really would like to be seen as a very pivotal player in the whole of the Indo-Pacific region. The second vertical which I was trying to really bring here, again, is very important. That is Indian Ocean littoral states, and that is something which is critical, not only from India's point of view, but the overall the seaborne trade point of view, and that is something which we need to really understand. And because Indian Ocean littorals really constitute, I don't know, maximum number of countries under that littorals. There's roughly 25 countries are part of the littorals. And if you see each of these countries, especially in the African coast, whether it is Kenya, South Africa, or Mozambique, they really are gaining momentum, especially in terms of seeing China's increasing presence in terms of investment. So they really have been able to make, not only create the sphere of influence, but also through that investment, they basically are trying to control the activities in the Indian Ocean littorals. The second important part of that littoral state is again Arabian Peninsula. If you see or the role of Oman, Yemen, Qatar and UAE, again that has become very important, especially from China's point of view, and that is emerging as a source of concern for the US and India in particular. The third, if you take again to understand the Indian Ocean littorals, and you see Iranian coast, which again has, in fact, South Asia, Southeast Asia. And obviously, if you see in Southeast Asia, the role of Myanmar, Thailand, and obviously other countries have become very, very prominent. And this is something which India certainly has been very active through various other policy and a strategy which it has unfolded. Whether it is to do with the Act East policy, which is again gaining momentum, and the progress which India has made in the Act East, especially by building connectivity, and that is something which India is banking on. There are a lot of strategic hubs, especially in the Indian Ocean littorals, which again has seen some sort of emphasis given by India. That is Andaman and Nicobar Island, that is again India's strategic hub. Diego Garcia has been one of the old strategic hub of the United States and the United Kingdom. Reunion, France basically has been putting more emphasis in reunion as a part of strengthening the strategic hub. And the fourth is Cocoa Island, that is again Australia. So I think you see the type of competition which has come in the maritime domain is phenomenal. And that competition is happening not only between select group of countries, but largely those countries which really have been trying to project their power by doing their force deployment. And that is something which is becoming a major source of concern for India. India basically is in the cusp of power, as you are aware. Unless it really emphasizes on maritime domain, I don't think this aspiration to emerge as a rising power could ever be met. I think that is something which India has to think of. Challenges from piracy, maritime disputes, South China Sea, which is very important and critical, because South China Sea route is being used by China to really get penetrated into the Indian Ocean region. Indian Ocean region, if you see, India basically occupies 40% of water of the Indian Ocean region. And that is something which is getting completely disturbed by more and more presence of China in the Indian Ocean. The third vertical, which again has gained momentum in the recent time, and that is something which we need to really bring for debate and discussion, is South Pacific. South Pacific was always neglected by India and obviously was not given much emphasis. China really occupied in fact, China built their sphere of influence in South Pacific, wanted to use that as a means to promote their interest. And South Pacific, India was concentrating just on Fiji. And now what has happened that China basically obviously has used their influence in terms of promoting their interest by not only exploiting the resources, but at the same time seeing that how they basically become a strong voice in the South Pacific. And the South Pacific country now, India is coming in a big way to mobilize the international public opinion, especially in favor of the freedom of navigation. And that is something which is happening in the current context. As you know that after this, I don't know, number of decades, I think no one basically had gone to Papua New Guinea and Prime Minister has visited there. So a lot of these changes which have occurred in South Pacific is again, they also are waiting for India to see that how they become in fact, more confident, and India becomes a part of the solution to many of the problems which the South Pacific countries are facing, especially from the maritime context. So I think it's going to be a very problematic area, the whole of the maritime domain, if India does not really understand the larger predicament which is emerging because of the competition which is being witnessed by both the US and China. And that is something which we need to understand. India certainly is not converging on the Indo-Pacific with the US, because the US treats China as a threat. India should not treat China as a threat. Because India and China, they have to work together. And if the 21st century has to emerge as an Asian century, I think there is no other way by which the Asian century can come. And if India and China do not work together, the center of gravity, which is supposedly going to be shifting from the west to the east, will never get shifted. So the seat of the power will always be occupied by the United States. So that, again, we have to understand with a lot of care and caution. If you see the overall role which India has to be playing, I think India is coming in a big way. There is no denying the fact. If you take various strategy and projects which India has come up with, is phenomenal. I think the Sagar project again is getting more of importance because of the fact that India basically believes in security and growth for all in the region, and that is something which is very important. The vision of Sagar, which again is a decade old, it came in 2015, that emphasized on economic and security cooperation among the countries in the vicinity, and that is something which is very, very important strategy of India. If you take the other part of the debate, which again is seeing that how India basically feels that unless India puts emphasis in the maritime domain, its energy security certainly would face a lot of challenges. So dependent on the sea basically is going to be very, very important, even to utilize the resources in a very, in a manner which could again provide win-win situation for all. So India is in the midst of these emerging challenges between the US and China. India cannot really come up with a lot of these issues which could really be detrimental for India's own economic growth. So with this, I will stop here. Thank you very much.